Today is day 28 since our count began on the first day of the week during the days of unleavened bread. We're counting toward Pentecost. God tells us to count. This is also a time when Jesus was with the apostles for 40 days. But we don't have hardly anything in the Bible about what he did, what happened during those 40 days. And so we're going to be concentrating on what the Bible does give to us, and that's an account of Israel leaving Egypt. We are almost at the day when Israel was 30 days out of leaving Egypt on the 15th day of the second month, so we're just about at that point. And we'll be reading in Exodus 16 about the 15th day of the second month of them coming out. We'll spend a little time on that. So, brethren, we too are on a journey to meet God. Israel was on a journey to meet God, out of Egypt toward the mountain. How did that journey begin for Israel? How did that journey begin for you? So today, let's review the journey of Israel towards the mountain of God from Egypt. And in parallel, we will review our journey to meet God and briefly consider 7 ideas. First idea, our calling. Second idea, the need to fear God to begin to change for the better. Need to fear God. Third, proof through power that Jesus is higher than all other gods of this world. Jesus is higher than all other gods of this world. Fourth, our journey with God can have moments of triumph as well as times of waiting. Our journey with God can have moments of triumph as well as times of waiting. God reveals, number 5, God reveals his laws by words and actions. Words and actions. Number 6, God is faithful even if we are not. God is faithful even if we're not. And 7th, even faithful men and women of God need help from others. Even faithful men and women of God need help from others. So the title of the sermon today is The Journey to Meet God. Let's talk about the call. God called one man, Moses, whom God prepared with many years of education, experience, service, and then, of course, humility for 40 years as a shepherd. Moses became a stranger in a strange land to fulfill the will of God. Have we become like strangers in our own land to fulfill the will of God? God sent one man to preach the good news of deliverance from physical slavery and the possibility of freedom. How were you called? Who was the messenger sent to you? Was it just one? I know in my case, I had a good friend on my Little League baseball team, and we talked about things, and I saw the plain truth, and you know what? Made no sense. So God said, Ray's sort of stubborn, stupid, something combination. So he sent someone else, sent a girlfriend. And so somehow the second time around it made a lot more sense. So that's briefly how I got called, but I'd be interested, from hearing how you all were called to as well from time to time. Moses was sent because God is faithful. God had promised something to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, and because God loved them, and God loved the people. God is also motivated to call you today because he loves you. Now, Israel received the call for freedom happily, but they soon became discouraged when things did not turn out as quickly as they had hoped. When you responded to the call, did you go through a period of discouragement because of opposition from family, friends, or employers? I had a relative said, it wouldn't have bothered me so much if it was named another, mainstream Christian group, but this Jewish thing that Ray's doing, that was a problem. Yeah, I had some opposition. Did God perhaps show you a miracle to encourage you in a downtime? I believe something special happened for me. If so, have you quickly forgotten the miracle God did for you? Or do you hold on to that experience as a precious jewel given to you personally by Almighty God? Are we good ground to produce 100-fold increase? Or will we turn out to be stony ground, people who have received the word happily at first, but when persecution or difficulties arise, well, we abandon the faith? You know, Moses was not given a timetable from God for when or how all this freedom would come to pass. Neither are we. I think if Moses would have told the people, because we believe he started his visit to Egypt and his ministry in the fall, if he would have said, look, it's going to get really bad for a while, but in 6 months, in springtime, we're out of here. If he could have told them that, I think Israel would have said, you know what, okay, we can put up with this stuff for 6 months. But they didn't know. God didn't tell them. God hasn't told you or me how long we will have to put up with certain things, whether it be problems with our job, problems with relatives, problems in various situations, health problems. He hasn't told us. We're not given a timetable. We're told, be patient, persevere. God is faithful. We'll see some things like that. So I think, number one, it's just good to reflect on our calling from time to time. How did we come to know the truth? Secondly, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord. Egypt and Israel, and we have to learn that the familiar gods and ways of this world are not those of the Creator God of heaven and earth. Israel and Egypt and we also have to learn the fear, the respect, the honor, and yes, obedience to the awesome, most high God. It took many mighty miracles to begin to teach Israel to begin to fear and obey God, at least enough to keep the Passover. So how did you learn to fear God? Because that's the beginning of wisdom. Was this fear of God taught to you by precept from your parents? For some here today, that's true, and that's wonderful. Was it a personal revelation? Did God call you out of a family? I'm the only one of my family to be called. But then God, of course, has given me a family, wife and children, and all of you are my family. Fear of God. Fear can be an initial motivator, but it is not a stable, long-lasting motivator. Fear of God did not keep Israel in line for long. Why? Because God's just not in the business of continually oppressing and punishing people for every mistake, is he? No, he's patient. He's kind. There's a prophecy, I think it's in Isaiah. God says, basically, I know why they don't believe me. I know why they don't fear me. It's because I have kept my peace a long time. Yes? God has kept his peace from world-shattering events like parting the Red Sea and things like that for a long time. Now, I think each one of us, we could probably say, well, God did a special thing in my life this way or that way. And that's meaningful to us. But it's not necessarily meaningful to someone in the next state over. God's kept his peace for a long time. We know, the prophecy indicates, there's coming a time, we believe fairly soon, God will not keep his peace anymore. And he will begin to intervene in mighty ways that will be unmistakable. But for the moment, a lot of people, they can still think they can get away with, I don't think I believe there's a God, or I don't really know if there's a God. Oh, okay. The day's coming, you're going to know, and you're going to know that you know. So, as I said, since God isn't continually punishing people for every mistake, people begin to lose their fear and respect. Now, we have to learn that love is the longest, strongest, and most stable motivator. How many times did God say you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, your being? Again and again and again. You think about the blessings, the benefits, the protections, the deliverances. Yes, we have trials and difficulties, and we know there's a reason for those too. But love is the strongest, longest, and most stable motivator of good personal behavior. But we do have to get started by something. Sometimes fear gets us going. Third point, Yahweh, the one who became Jesus Christ, is higher than all the gods of this world. Let's go to Exodus 12. I thought to maybe start the presentation with Israel crossing the Red Sea, and I thought, nah, I need to go back. I'll just get a little bit of Israel in Egypt, how the calling, how the fear of the God, because Israel started learning the fear of the God with all of these miracles and plagues in Egypt, right? But Exodus 12 and verse 12, Yahweh, the one who became Jesus, said, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night." You think about it. Jesus is a man of war. Jesus, according to multiple scriptures, indicates that he went through the land of Egypt and he caused to be killed the firstborn. Exodus 12, verse 12. I will pass through. And every time you see pass through, that's one of these things, God, that means destruction. Pass over, in the Bible means to deliver, to spare. So Jesus said, Exodus 12:12, I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the eternal. I am Yahweh. He's going to execute judgment. Now, we've had good, presentations here in this congregation about how many gods there were in Egypt. And, sometimes we might think, oh, they weren't really gods. Well, what do you think a god is? How do they understand the concept of gods? Well, I think a very brief but comprehensive understanding would be that they understood gods as non-physical beings with great power. They weren't physical. We would call them spirit, and they had great power. Such a being, they felt, could give you benefits if it wanted to, or could do you harm. And so appeasing the gods so they wouldn't do you harm was pretty important, as well as doing things to get their favor. I think it's a mistake for us to think that, the god of the Nile, the crocodile, the dung beetle god, they were just nothing. Oh no, there were spirit beings behind these gods. And they could do things from time to time. But Jesus, Yahweh, said, I am above all of these gods. He judged all those gods. He showed their impotence. The Nile turned to blood. All the flies and all the stuff happening, even the hail and the darkness. The sun god, impotent before our God. So he judged all those gods. Yahweh was shown to be superior to all of them. Multiple plagues, mighty miracles prove the gods of Egypt could not compare to Yahweh, our God, the one who became Jesus Christ. Exodus 14:30. So God led them out of Egypt. And they didn't go the quick way. They didn't take the freeway to Palestine, if you want to call it that way. They sort of went another way. And they went in a way where they were hemmed in by the mountains and the sea. And they were complaining, and they were afraid. In Exodus 14, you hear the story. Exodus 14 and verse 13, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will see again no more forever. And again, forever, we understand that word in Hebrew means you won't see it's an indeterminate time period out of the ken of those people who were there, because we know there's a resurrection coming, so they'll probably see these Egyptians way in the future, but they wouldn't see them again in this life. The Lord will fight for you. You shall hold your peace. They didn't know what to do. And various times in Israel's history and Judah's history, the leader said, God, we have this 1,000,000-man army coming up, the Ethiopians, the Ammonites, the Moabites, all these people. We don't know what to do. So they fasted, and then God responded. He showed them what they should do. And here, God showed them what to do. He said, go forward. At that time, the walls of water on either side, the Red Sea parted. They walked through. Exodus 14, verse 30. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the fear of the Lord, the power of the Lord, the judging of the gods of Egypt. So the people feared the Lord, that's good, and they believed the Lord and his servant Moses, that's good. And how long did that last? 3 days maybe, I don't know. But it was good, it was good. And so they had a triumph. And you see this in Exodus 15. You can read the whole Song of Moses as it's recounted here. I just want to cover verses 11 through 13. Exodus 15, 11 through 13. Who is like you, O Yahweh, O Lord, among the gods? And that word gods is Elim. So here it says, yeah, these deities in Egypt, they were real beings represented by, the Nile, the sun, these kind of things. But who's like our God? These guys, they are like way down here. They're not worthy of worship. Who is like you and glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. You in your mercy have led forth your people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation. Now they weren't there yet, but again, we know this is how God talks. When God says something, it's as good as being done. You read about that in Romans 4:17. So he was guiding them to his habitation, to the mountain of God, but they weren't there yet. So we see, they say, who is like you, O Lord, among all the gods? Well, we know that Jesus is above all of the gods of this world, and we know, just you can hold your finger back in Exodus, but go to John 14:28. John 14:28, Jesus revealed in John 14:28, he said, if you loved me, you would rejoice because I said, I'm going to my Father, for my Father is greater than I. So when I pray to the Father, many times I say, Most High God, because our Father is God Most High. And Jesus, the Son of God, is there, and Jesus said the Father was greater than him. But of course, our Father and Jesus, they're greater than all the other spirit beings because these are created spirit beings. Even though they can do power, God's limited what they can do in time and in their power. So Jesus proved by power that he is higher than all the gods of this world. Number 4, our journey with God can have high moments of triumph as well as times of questioning, need, and waiting. Questioning, need, and waiting. Yes, we saw a part of the Song of Moses, the triumph that they had. Verse 20 of Exodus 15, Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. What a triumph. We're alive. We thought we were going to all die, but we're alive. How great is our God, showing miracles to open the Red Sea, to get us through. And so they had moment of triumph. Just turn the page, or down next verse, verse 22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. They went out into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And so 3 days without a water source, the people were worried. You'd be worried, I'd be worried. My water skin is getting low. My animals are thirsty. My kids are thirsty. What are we going to do? I don't see anything. This is a wilderness. What are we going to do? Fasting for even 1 day makes me weak. 3 days, there's no water source. What's going on? I think they still had some water, but they were getting low. They were worried. They got to Marah. The waters are bitter. Wait a minute. What are we going to do? The people only saw Moses. Even though Moses kept trying to say, Yahweh, he's the one that's leading us. He's guiding us. The pillar of cloud by day, the fire by night. God's leading us. No, they complained to a man. That's a big mistake. We need to take our concerns to God. That's what Moses did. People said, what shall we drink? Verse 25. So Moses cried out to the Lord. The Lord showed him a tree, which he cast into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. Found a tree. Sometimes we don't see a clear way forward. We need to take the problem to God and wait patiently on him as we humbly try to do our part. At Marah, God showed Moses a tree. Was this a type of the stake Jesus would bear? The tree changed the water from bitter to sweet. We know the sacrifice of Christ was bitter, but the result of it, the possibility of many sons and daughters having eternal life, that is sweet. And that is what Jesus looked forward to. Continuing on, there he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them and said, if you will diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. I believe that's Yahweh Rophika. I am the Lord who heals you. So here we see even already an intimation of the covenant. It's a simple covenant. Obey my voice. That's what God says. Obey my voice for your own good and for the good of your children and those after you. But God tested them. He tests us. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you which I brought on the Egyptians. I can only imagine what kind of diseases the Egyptians had. All sorts of terrible things. For I am the Lord who heals you. As God could heal the bitter waters, God can heal our pains and sicknesses. By the beating that he suffered, by his stripes, we are healed. Now, our part includes listening diligently to the voice of God, doing what he says, obeying his commandments, doing our part. And even then, it's up to God to act when he chooses in the way that he chooses. And so we wait on him. And we don't have a timetable necessarily. But God says, those who wait on the Lord will be blessed. Exodus 16, verse 1. So they journeyed from Elim, and at Elim they had 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. Well, was that somehow, indicative of, one well for each tribe of Israel? 70 palm trees, 70 leaders of Israel. I mean, you can sort of wonder about some of these things, but that's what it says. They journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Now, I did a little research, and apparently in the manuscripts, there's a logic pause there after Sinai. It's called an atna. It's a logic pause. So some people say, well, they were traveling on the 15th of the month. Well, apparently not. Apparently they came there, but then, pause, then on the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt, the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained. Now, we would never complain on the Sabbath, would we? Well, I'm going to show you evidence, which I think is reasonable and cogent, that the 15th day of the second month was indeed a weekly Sabbath. We're going to spend a little time here on that. So we're at point 5. God reveals his laws by what he says and what he does. What he says and what he does. And we're going to see in Exodus 16 that God was revealing again to these people the weekly Sabbath, knowledge which apparently they had lost in the decades of slavery. So on the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt, the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." And it is one of those perversities of human nature that people are willing to give up their freedom in return for some kind of security. The Chinese call it the iron rice bowl. I'll do whatever the government says as long as I have, food. That seems to be a human characteristic. They said that they would have preferred to stay in slavery in Egypt as long as they had all the good food that they had in Egypt. So they're complaining. And again, just for the sake of argument, think in your mind, this 15th day of the second month, it's a weekly Sabbath. Okay, so they're complaining to God. What does God do? Does he, get mad at them? No, actually, he gives them some blessings. He's going to show them some generosity. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them. So again, another test, whether they walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the sixth day, they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Now, how much did they gather? I got my good friend Homer. I've had Homer for a long time. This is an omer. As many of you know, it's 1/10 of an ephah. That explains things clearly. So an omer is about 2 liters, okay? And I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, but they were supposed to go out and collect 1 omer per person of this manna that eventually was going to come the next day. So they're on one day, and God says, okay, the next day at Boker, dawn, I'm going to rain manna. Now, you look at this. Now, I actually put brown rice, okay? But if you think that manna was about like a grain of brown rice, how many grains do you think are in here? Now, one wise person said 144,000? No. I don't know. Okay. But it takes a lot of effort to pick up all these grains. Now, again, this sort of gets me the idea. Remember, Jesus, when he's going to come, he's going to clean out his threshing floor, and he's not going to leave one grain behind. You and I are individual grains. God's not going to leave any person behind. We might get caught down in the cracks there in the rock, the threshing floor. God's going to clean that. He's going to take all the grain. He's going to put it together, and then the chaff, going to burn with fire, okay? But that's what they were supposed to do. So let's continue on. Okay. It shall be on the sixth day, they shall prepare what they bring in. It shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Well, of course they knew the Lord had brought them out of the land of Egypt, didn't they? Well, but of course the people kept thinking it was Moses. They kept looking at a man. This is a mistake, brethren. We need to look to God. Yes, God has human beings that he works through. Prophets, prophetesses, deacons, deaconesses, elders. He has people that he works through. All sorts of different people. But we look to God. We look to God. Israel, they couldn't get past that. So at evening, and this word at evening there is at sunset. The Hebrew is kerev. Usually the form is ba'ereb, but it could be translated at sunset. You will know that Yahweh has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning at Boker, and Boker is dawn, okay? It's when the sun starts coming up. At Boker, you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, again, after sunset, and in the morning bread to the full, for the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. What are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. So Moses spoke to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. So God was there. They had these signs all the time that God was there, yet somehow it didn't get through to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I've heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight, and that phrase there in Hebrew is Bein ha'arbaim. It's a very famous phrase. Bein, it means between the two evenings. At twilight, between the two evenings, you shall eat meat. And in the morning, you shall be filled with bread. You shall know that I am the Lord, your God. Well, when was this Bein Ha'arbaim? When was that? Well, here, again, for the sake of argument, I'm saying that this was between sunset and dark after the weekly Sabbath of the 15th. If you hold your finger there, go back to Exodus 30. Exodus 30. We have another use of that phrase, Bein Ha'arbaim. Exodus 30 and verse 7. Exodus 30, verse 7. So here it's talking about the altar of incense. And Exodus 30, verse 7 says, Aaron shall burn on it sweet incense every morning when he tends the lamps. He shall burn incense on it. And when Aaron lights the lamps at twilight, or Bein Ha'arbaim, he shall burn incense on it, perpetual incense before the Lord. So he lights the lamps when? Between the two evenings. Now, you should know that there's a lot of discussion about what does this mean. Some of the rabbis say that, well, it could mean between noon and sunset. Some people say, well, no, actually it has to wait a little bit. The sun has to be going down maybe 3 o'clock to sunset. The Church of God teaches and believes, I personally believe it as well, that this Bein Ha'arbaim is between sunset and dark. It's about an hour period of time. And logically, you wouldn't need lights or lamps in the afternoon. You still have the sun up. But after the sun goes down, yeah, there's a little bit of twilight. You light the lamps to give you light, and then it gets dark. So logically here, twilight would be after sunset, but before dark. So that's one good explanation about Bein Ha'arbaim. Well, let's go back to Exodus 12. And again, our understanding, and we'll read this in Exodus 12, verse 6. Exodus 12, verse 6. After it's telling the Israelites that you should choose a lamb on the 10th day of the month, your lamb, verse 5, shall be without blemish, a male of the first year, type of Jesus Christ. You can take it from the sheep or the goats. Notice you don't take it from the herd. There's no Passover calf. And that's a problem when you start reading Deuteronomy 16. Talks about, well, that's a different study, I guess. But just remember, there's no Passover calf. It's Passover lamb from the sheep or the goats. And you shall keep it, verse 6, up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight, Bein Ha'arbaim. You kill it after sunset, but before dark. And then you take some of the blood, put it on the doorpost, and then you roast it. And it takes a couple hours to roast. And by the time they actually ate it, it was probably at least 10:30, 11, depending how big the lamb was. It takes a while to roast. And then they ate it in fear and trembling, because very soon after that, Jesus went through the land of Egypt, and the firstborn died. But Israel was to kill it, Bein Ha'arbaim, twilight, between the two evenings, and we understand that's between sunset and dark. And brethren, that's why we start the Passover service after sunset, but before dark, because of what we see here in our understanding of Bein Ha'arbaim. So back to Exodus 16. Exodus 16. So God said that they would eat meat at twilight. But then what we see in Exodus 16, verse 13, so it was that the quails came up at evening, and again the Hebrew, ba'ereb, at sunset, and covered the camp. They didn't come before sunset. They came at sunset and afterwards. They covered the camp. And in the morning, in Boker, the dew lay all around the camp. And when the dew lifted, there was on the surface of the wilderness a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they didn't know what it was. That's what manna means. It means, what is this? And Moses said, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to one's need, 1 omer for each person. According to the number, let every man take for those who are in his tent." So get the timing of this. You have sunset, the quail come, the people grab the quail, they start killing the quail, plucking the feathers, roasting them, and they start eating. You know, within an hour, they could start eating. Didn't say they'd eat all the quail in an hour, but they started eating in that hour. It's just interesting. You know, God waited until after the Sabbath to give the quails so the people would not work to kill, clean, and roast the quail on the Sabbath. They did all that after the sun went down. They started eating before dark, between the two evenings, Bain Harabaim. So then they were supposed to gather manna the next morning, the boker. So what's the next morning? I posit to you that it is the first day of the week, what we call Sunday. And it says that they were supposed to collect the manna for 5 days. They got 1 omer. And the people tried to keep it overnight. It bred worms and stank, you know. I would be very suspicious of something that if I didn't eat it on one day, if I kept the next day, it would breed worms and stink. I wonder, are there worms in it already? What's going on? But, that's what God gave them to eat. So you're thinking about it. Put yourself in the shoes of these people. And remember, these were slaves. They didn't come out in nice, fine clothes. They came out with rough clothing. They were used to being dirty. They were used to being, oppressed. They had bad language. I mean, they had all sorts of problems and pathologies. They like I said, they just come out, clean suits and clothes and, I've got a washing machine, go wash everything, and they didn't have silk shirts, and who knows what they had. They had what they had. But they came out. And you start saying, okay, they're getting this manna, 1 omer each day. Let's read about it. Every man gathered according to each one's need. Moses said, let no one leave any of it till the morning, verse 19. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning. It bred worms and stank. Moses was angry with them. So they gathered every morning, every man according to his need. When the sun became hot, it melted. So it was on the 6th day. So, okay, it's after, that the quail came after sunset. The next morning, omer, you go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 6th day. They gathered twice as much manna, 2 omers for each person. And all the rulers of the congregation came to Moses. Then he said, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is the Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, boil what you will boil. Lay it for yourselves, all that remains to be kept until morning. So they laid it up till morning, as Moses commanded. It didn't stink, nor were there any worms in it. Moses says, eat that today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. And of course it happened, some of the people went out on the 7th day. Anyway, they found none. And the Lord said, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? This was before Mount Sinai. The Sabbath was in force. God said it's a command before Sinai. See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days, so that every man remain in his place on the 7th day. So the people rested. The people of Israel call this name manna. It's like white coriander seed, like wafers made of honey. And they ate the manna. Verse 34, Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid up a pot of manna before the testimony. The testimony are the 2 tablets of the commandments, written with the finger of God. So when you see testimony, that is the actual tablets of the law. The children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Think about that. Every day, Sunday through Thursday, 1 thing of manna, 1 omer of manna each. Friday, double the manna. Saturday, none. All the time. It just amazes me. People can get used to anything, I guess, and then just got used to it. Well, that's just the way it is. Of course, that's totally extraordinary what they had. Why didn't they believe God? He was faithful to them, even though, and we have so many times when they weren't faithful, and God was faithful to give them the manna anyway. He could have said, I've had it with Mr. Smith. He's on his own now. Do we think that? Well, do you think God's going to just say one day, I've had it with you. I'm not going to help you anymore? Well, I don't think so. God's faithful. Like we heard in the sermonette, we can go to bed at night and we can understand in the morning gravity still works. In fact, it's going to work all night. Everything's going to be fine in the morning. But God wasn't happy with this constant doubting, this constant complaining. So what, and think about us. What about us? Do we constantly complain? Are we doubting? Or we say, Father, it's a time of waiting. You will show us what you want us to do. We need to have that patience and trust and faith. God's given us a bit of his Spirit. We can do this with his help. It's not us by ourselves, but God in us will do it. So they complained. Chapter 17. All the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord. They camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for them to drink. And so they contended with Moses, saying, give us water. Same problem. They blamed the human leader. Who do we blame in our trials? Brethren, it is not against flesh and blood that we fight. It is a spiritual warfare. A spiritual warfare. So what happened? Well, Moses went on ahead with a few of the elders, and he struck the rock at Horeb, and water came out. You can read about this. I'm summarizing it for you. This was symbolic of Jesus being killed and the Holy Spirit being given generally to the world. This also reminds us that we are among those few who are called now to go on ahead of many others, to witness the truth of God, and to prepare for the arrival, the repentance, and the conversion of many others later on. Now, since Jesus was killed only once, when Moses, many years later, in a fit of anger, you can read about it in Numbers chapter 20, verses 10 through 12, in a fit of anger, Moses struck the rock twice for water. That broke the type of Jesus, because he was supposed to speak to the rock. And this applies to us. We do not strike Jesus. Jesus will not be struck a second time, but we are to speak to the rock of our salvation. Give him our thoughts, our fears, our hopes, our needs, and he will provide. Before the sin of pride and anger and striking the rock years later, when God said, just speak to the rock, Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land. God takes that very seriously. And these things, I won't turn to 1 Corinthians 10, but says these things were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages are come. So we today must speak to our rock, Jesus Christ. We need to explain to him our needs, our wants, our woes. Don't blame humans, because we're in a spiritual warfare. Ask God for the help that we need, and wait on the Lord and do our part, whatever that may be, depending on the circumstances. So they complained. God was getting a little bit tired of this. And there are consequences for doubt. There are consequences for complaining. What was one of the consequences? God allowed Amalek to come upon them. Exodus 17, verse 8. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose some men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And we understand from other scriptures that Amalek, they were basically coming behind. They were getting the weak, the elderly, the sick, and they were basically trying to kill them or enslave them. Our path to God will have, at times, will have conflict. We'll have times of want and times of waiting. And then we get to our last point. Even faithful human spiritual leaders need help. Even faithful men and women of God need help. Exodus 17, verse 11. So Joshua did as Moses told him. They fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. What is this a symbol of? Prayer. Prayer to God. Faith to God, looking to God on high. But Moses' hands became heavy So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side, the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. That word steady there, that's the same word used for faith in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 4. His hands were faithful. They were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Moses was praying in faith. He was pointing once again to the fact that Israel should have faith in God and trust him for protection, deliverance, providing water, providing food. Israel didn't learn the lesson. Exodus 18 and verse 19. So they get to the mountain, and then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, comes, and they get together and they talk, and they talk about various things. And then we see in Exodus 19 that Moses' father-in-law sees that he's sitting with the people and deciding things from morning till night. In verse 15, Moses said to his father-in-law, he's sort of explaining, this is what I have to do because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another. I make them known the statutes of God and his laws. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you're doing is not good. Not good. Now, he was showing them the statutes of God. That is good. What was not good about it? What was not good about it was he said, both you and this people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You're not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I'll give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, that you may bring the difficulties to God. You shall teach them the statutes and laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place over them to be rulers of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them judge the people at all times. Then it shall be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it'll be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. And if you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure. And all this people will also go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law, and he did that. One man cannot and should not try to be all things to all people, and supply every need of every person in the congregation or the church of God at large. God will provide the persons needed. That's all of you. Every one of you. Every joint is to supply something. We read about that in Ephesians. God is not a waster, and he doesn't sort of say, I don't know, I called Mr. Jones, but I don't know what to do with him because he really doesn't have any skills. I mean, what am I going to do with him? He doesn't do that. Every person is here for a reason. Each of you are required and needed and wanted. So please continue to look within yourself. I know many of you already have done this, but it's a good thing to do from time to time. Please continue to look within yourself with God's help. See how you can humbly and personally be a greater help to others in the congregation, including me, because I need your help too. So Israel, Exodus 19, they finally arrive at the mountain of God. This mountain was where Israel would truly meet their God. And it was after baptism. They'd learned the fear of the God. They came through the Red Sea like sort of a baptism. And they went through the wilderness. They learned, the Sabbath. That was a key thing they had to learn. And they learned that, well, there's going to be trials and difficulties and fights along the way. But they would truly meet God at the mountain. After many trials and difficulties, God came down then with thunder, lightning, earthquakes, and thick darkness. This was where a marriage covenant was to be made with God. We too are called to a spiritual mountain to meet our God and enter into a spiritual eternal marriage with Jesus Christ at his return. His return will also be marked with massive miracles, thunder, lightning, earthquakes, but with one big difference. Instead of thick darkness, every eye will see our God as he comes. He will be hidden no more. Our journey to meet God will then culminate in our joyful marriage to Jesus. And we'll be talking a little bit more about marriage at Pentecost. So let's summarize. We saw that one man was sent to call Israel to freedom. We too are called to freedom from sin. How beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace. We saw that the fear of the Lord is just the beginning of wisdom. It must be replaced with love as the stronger, lasting motivator of good behavior. Thirdly, Jesus was revealed as more powerful than all the other gods worshipped in Egypt, or on this earth for that matter. We understand that Jesus is the God being who dealt with human beings and that his Father is greater than he is. Next, our journey with God can have high moments of triumph as well as times of questioning, need, and waiting. We saw that God reveals his laws by what he says. So he told them, this is what's going to happen. And then he did it. And then afterwards, when they didn't do it, he said, how long are you going to keep messing up? God taught us. He said, listen to my voice. And then if you just go on to Exodus 19, that's the covenant. Obey my voice. Very simple. Very simple. Obey my voice. God reveals his laws by what he says and what he does. Next point, God is faithful even if we are not. There are bad consequences for lack of faith. Eventually, Israel, that generation, from those numbered 20 and above, the men of war, they could not enter the promised land because that generation lacked faith, and they did die in the wilderness. In spite of the constant repeated great miracles from God, every week, 5 days of manna, 1 omer a day. Friday, double the omer. Saturday, no omers, no manna. Every week, all the time. In spite of that, they doubted, they lacked faith. Finally, last point, even faithful human spiritual leaders need help. We are becoming a spiritual family. We all have important talents to share, ways to help the whole body to grow in grace, knowledge, and become successful with God. So in conclusion, the experiences Israel lived through coming out of Egypt were to prepare them to meet and trust God when they arrived at Mount Sinai for the Pentecost Marriage Covenant weekend. The experiences we have today help us prepare for eternal life with Jesus Christ as the bride of Christ. We are soon to be born again with spiritual, glorious, powerful bodies, which will not tire, which will not become sick, bodies that will allow us to see God as he is. So let us go to God in faith, expressing our needs and our desires and wait on him. Be of good courage. Our God loves us. He wants us. And he will do everything necessary to help us overcome and win through to eternal life.